Kenny, let's focus on the Jets. We spent a lot of time the last couple months talking about who would be protected and who would be lost. And I think it's safe to say, many of our conversations at the development of Logan Stanley were on the money, that he was the guy that was selected, because I think many people believe that he would have been picked, even if he doesn't fit in right into the plans immediately. The potential of a player like Stanley would be too much for a guy like Ron Francis to move. A lot of people were very concerned that Dylan DeMello would go, and I would imagine Cheveldayoff was one of those players, one of those people as well. You don't like to lose Mason Appleton, but given the fact that you were losing a player, I think everyone would agree that the Jets have far more ability to lose someone from the forward core than the defense core. Would you say this worked out, with all due respect to Appleton, who was great for the Winnipeg Jets and had a real solid season? It worked out about as well as could have been expected, considering they didn't have to give up anything to have them select Appleton. And, the defense core is still intact, although still needing some additions for next year.
Yeah, Huss, I mean, first and foremost, shout out to you for having that for quite some time in terms of the development discussions and the debates. And some folks were not in agreement, and some folks didn't like your suggestion, but you had it bang on from the beginning. Best case scenario is the best way to describe it, Huss, and that is not a knock on Mason Appleton. People who have been following your show and following my work know that I picked Appleton to be the breakout player or surprise candidate for this year, and he absolutely was that player with 12 goals and 25 points. He's really developed well into a middle six forward after being a sixth round draft pick out of the USHL. Really hardworking guy. We know that, he probably hasn't hit his ceiling yet. He's going to be a consistent double-digit goal scorer. He's got great speed, probably one of the best at getting to the back post on the Winnipeg Jets and getting, either rebound goals or banging in backdoor tap-ins. Really smart penalty killer when used in that role and can give you some help on the second power play if you need him to do so. I think it's a great opportunity for him. And I think right out of the gate, Seattle knows what Tampa Bay was able to have success with. For me, I think you immediately put Brandon Tanev and Mason Appleton on a line together, and you have 2/3 of a really good third line. And if it's possible, I mean, those guys could potentially move up if you need them to, but that's a really good third line with the potential to move up if you had to. In terms of the Jets, not losing DeMello is absolutely massive. I know that this point of contention has been hotly contested, but not having to replace two top four defensemen is an absolute, it's a win for the Jets. There's no doubt about that. If they had lost DeMello, their job would have got exponentially more difficult. It was a calculated risk for sure, Huss. I think there probably would have been some anxious moments, but we know that Kevin Cheveldayoff and company would have done their due diligence, and it worked out for them. I mean, some people are saying, well, you shouldn't give the Jets credit because it worked out for them. Two things can be simultaneously true. It can be a calculated risk, but it could also be the right decision at the same time. And for the Jets, in this case, it certainly was that. So the bigger thing, Huss, is that now they have to fill that other spot, right? So as great as the news was for the Winnipeg Jets yesterday, two of their potential targets are also off the board, and Adam Larson and Jamie Alexiak, who we know the Jets were definitely in on Alexiak at the trade deadline. He would have received an offer very similar to what he got from Seattle. Would they have been comfortable with 5 years? We don't know that currently, but we know that that's what it was going to take to win the bid. So the job will become still difficult. But, I mean, the job is obviously easier when you only have to replace one of those guys instead of two. So I would say the Jets are in a pretty good spot, and, this was a potential road with navigating with potential to have many potholes to elude. And I would say that the Jets were able to elude the majority of those potholes. But now it's all about making sure the road is completely smoothed over, if you will, when it comes to building that defense core. Because I don't know about you, Huss, but I've been looking at that UFA list, and beyond Dougie Hamilton, I don't see a lot of really great options when it comes to the UFA candidates on the right side. So to me, that means you either got to move one of your guys onto the right side, or you have to make a trade. And I think that we're seeing some trades come and start happening. But right now, Huss, I don't know about you, but for me, I think the best chance for the Jets to fill that void is in a trade, unless they're able to, swing for the fences and get a Dougie Hamilton.
Does Brandon Montour fit in with the Jets if he was there? He's sort of that next tier of guys that is established and would probably fit a need. I guess the question is that good enough? And is there a better option on the trade market? And as far as the trade market goes, we'll get to free agency next week. What intrigues you about the Jets situation going into tomorrow night and the first round? If we're talking about a potential trade, does it happen this weekend, or is that something that maybe need to see how things shake out going into free agency and then make a move?
Yeah, two big things at play there, Huss. I think the fact that the Jets only have the 4 picks, I would think that I'd be pretty comfortable suggesting that they're probably going to make that pick at 18/17 as after the forfeiture, as you earlier mentioned. It will be the 18th overall pick in the annals of history, but it will be the 17th player chosen. Some intriguing candidates at a lot of variety of positions they wrote about today. Including Winnipegger Carson Lambos. And sure, folks are going to say, well, the Jets have a quote unquote stacked left side already, and their prospects are, tilted to that left side. But to me, Carson Lambos is an NHL prospect in, 2 or 3, 4 years down the road. So I don't think that you don't take him because he's a left-handed shooting defenseman. If you see that high-end ceiling that he was displaying 2 years ago when he was a full-time player and had such a great year. So to me, I expect the Jets to make that pick, but I also expect a lot of other things to be in play. And the other factor, Huss, we know, and we'll dive right into it, is the status of Andrew Copp's situation. We expect negotiations are already ongoing. Some folks saw Saturday as a bit of a deadline, but to me, that was an artificial deadline. Andrew Copp was always going to be protected by the Winnipeg Jets. I think that there are two sides that want to make a deal here, but at some point, there's going to come a time, the moment of truth, if you will. And some of the developments in the recent history and memory will play a role. I mean, we know Zach Hyman, if his numbers coming in at just over 5 or right around 5, now Ryan Nugent-Hopkins coming in around 5, we know that Andrew Copp's camp probably wanted somewhere in the vicinity of $5 million, depending on the term. So we've always talked before that, the Jets would probably like that number to be closer to Alex Iafallo and the LA Kings, and that's around 4. So is there middle ground that's found, or where do they get to? But what we do know is that we don't expect this to reach the arbitration stage. We know that the player-elected arbitration is an option for Andrew Copp, but if that happens, we expect a deal to be made in terms of a trade before that ruling comes down, because the Jets aren't going to let Andrew Copp play his last year and walk for nothing. So I do think there's still, I don't know if there's momentum in the negotiations or not. I would expect, we know that Andrew Copp wants to be part of this team, and we know the Jets want him to be part of it. We know he's part of the core group. He's part of the leadership group. And now it's all about finding a number and term that both sides are comfortable with. So having said all that, obviously we know the top priority for the Jets is adding another defenseman. Neil Pionk could move into that top role with Adam or with Josh Morrissey. Maybe you look for a second pairing guy, but I am more likely thinking that it's going to be a Logan Stanley playing with Neil Pionk, and then you're going to find a partner for Josh Morrissey, and then you probably have Heinola with DeMello in that mentorship role, but that you can also play DeMello in that top pairing role as well. So it's all about, we know it's a big supply and demand. We know there's a lot of teams looking to upgrade their defense core. So are you going to take a big swing, or do you have to make a trade? I mean, those are the big questions that the Jets are faced with right now. But in terms of their lineup, they have some young forwards that we know need work. We know need to be getting full-time work, including David Gustafson, who's the Manitoba Moose MVP. To me, I have him on that fourth line center role. If you wanted to move him to the wing, could you fill him into that spot vacated by Mason Appleton? Sure. Jansen Harkins is a guy who's looking for a bounce-back season. We know Christian Vesalainen moved his way up the depth chart this year. So there are a lot of pieces at the forward position where the Jets are, in pretty good shape, but I wouldn't rule out them looking there too. And we all know the other development, broken by Darren Dreger today as it pertains to Cole Perfetti. This is a big deal, Hassan.
Yeah,
I mean, if
exactly.
this rule change is made...
I wanted to get to this with you. I mean, just for folks, if they have missed this, I was saving it for you, but we spent a lot of time yesterday talking about the Perfetti situation. And, as it stands right now, as a 19-year-old drafted out of the Canadian Hockey League, you're either making the National Hockey League team or you're going back to junior. And, it's been well documented what he did at the AHL level, playing at the World Championships. It doesn't seem like there's much to be gained by Cole Perfetti. And I guess what Dregs, broke earlier today is that, what is being thrown out there, that players that played 20 games in the American League last year, of which Perfetti is one of, would have the opportunity to play in the American Hockey League. And if that is approved, that is big for, I'd say, the Jets and Cole Perfetti, that he could play professional hockey. And I still think he may very well get an opportunity to play with the Jets. But if that isn't the case, playing in the American Hockey League did him a lot of good last year, and I'm sure would do very as well this year. What are you hearing on that, Ken? And just your thoughts on what that maybe does to, the conversations around Perfetti and where he would end up next season if that wasn't an option.
Yeah, so it's a massive development, both for the player and for the Jets organization. Obviously, we know that there have been circumstances in the past where, that we would have loved to have been able to send Mark Scheifele to the minors rather than send him back to Barrie the second time, I think. And no offense to his development at Barrie and with the World Juniors and everything else, but he was ready for that next challenge. And based on how Perfetti was able to use his spatial awareness and his hockey IQ and hockey sense to be such a consistent performer at the American Hockey League level, for him, he needs to be challenged. So being challenged, and that's not a knock on the Ontario Hockey League, which is a great league, but unless he's going back to a Memorial Cup contender, for him, the next step is to steal an NHL job or to be playing in the American Hockey League and furthering his development. And the biggest thing with that, Huss, that we know is, I think that he's going to get his chance. He's going to get a run to show that he's an NHL player. But if he's not quite there yet, then the ability to send him to the Manitoba Moose and to have him one phone call away and be able to have him called up rather than sending him back to junior and then saying, well, when your junior season's over, you either join the Moose or you hopefully get yourself into a Cole Caulfield situation. Well, now they wouldn't have to worry about that. Now you have him with the Manitoba Moose, or you have him with the Winnipeg Jets if he wins the job. And we know that this is a guy who came a long way in 1 year at a time where many of his peers didn't even get to play hockey last year. So Perfetti used that year of development so wisely. He's such a smart player. We know that he is valued for all the tools that he brings. This summer, it's all about a great summer of training and everything else. Great for him to be able to go to the World Junior Camp. But this is his first NHL camp, so he's going to have to go out and win a job. And I think that he will be prepared to make the decision as difficult as humanly possible for Paul Maurice and Kevin Cheveldayoff and company.
Ken Wiebe joining us here on Winnipeg Sports Talk. One of the other things that's being mentioned, I guess somewhat in relation to Perfetti, but also, another story with the Winnipeg Jets is Paul Stastny's status. You heard anything about conversations with Stastny from the Winnipeg Jets? And I guess I won't put you on the spot saying what will happen, what do you expect, but is Paul Stastny still a possibility for next year? And if he does or doesn't sign, what does that mean for the Winnipeg Jets?
Yeah, I would think that it's still a possibility for the Jets, of course, Huss, but it would have to be at a discount from his salary from last year. And what that number is, we don't know. There's going to be genuine interest in Paul Stastny's status. I don't think we're looking at a Joe Thornton league minimum situation for him, but I do think you'll have to take a significant haircut from the 6.5 that he made last year. To me, it's going to be all about fit. Paul Stastny's a guy who wants to win. He's knocked on the door several times in his career before. He's a guy that's going to make sense on a lot of levels. I think about who the Tampa Bay Lightning could lose, and I think that Paul Stastny would be a great fit there. Some people say, well, he's not the fleetest of foot, but he's the type of smart, intelligent player that really could flourish with a team like Tampa Bay. I think the Colorado Avalanche are going to be a team that are interested in adding some more center depth, and an experienced guy like Paul Stastny, who's been to the conference final several occasions. I think the Minnesota Wild could be kicking the tires on Paul Stastny, but ultimately I think the Jets would be interested, Huss, but it's all about the number. Is that number 3 million? Is that number 2 million? I don't know that at this point, and we won't know. This is the one time where not having the interview period window kind of hurts the situation, I think. But I would think that the Jets are certainly interested. We know he's been a great mentor for Pierre-Luc Dubois. We know he has great relationships with guys like Mark Scheifele, Blake Wheeler, Andrew Copp, and guys like that. And I think he's still a very capable player. So he will be valued in the open market, but it'll be on a short-term deal. And I think the only thing that maybe works against the Jets in the situation was nothing they did. It was the pandemic. I think it would have been a tough scenario for Paul and his family in Winnipeg last year with just not having that ability to have those same interactions that you would normally have. But this is a guy who loves the game. His pursuit of the Stanley Cup final, he wants to win it. He wants to be on that trophy, Huss. So that's what drives him to play. I think he's still a very capable player. We've seen that. He's so smart. He can help a team's power play. And I do think that he's not going to have trouble finding work. Where that work is going to lead him still would be a bit of a mystery right now. But I do think the Jets are interested in bringing him back at the right price, if you will.
Yeah, I do too. And I think that it's probably more likely that he comes back, or at least that they make a significant push to get him. just because of what we saw from Pierre-Luc Dubois last year. And, it's not a knock on Dubois. I mean, I think they still believe in him, but, it didn't really work out in that first season. And, if it doesn't going forward and you don't have Paul Stastny, you've got a pretty significant issue there in the top six of the forwards. But again, that's why so many people will bring up Perfetti. I'm not here saying that he's ready to just pop in and be a top six center right now in the National Hockey League. But it is quite intriguing because as much as we spend a lot of time obsessing over what's happening with the Jet blue line, there are also some questions about the forward group. And that was even before Mason Appleton got picked, because I think a lot of people thought that they would get victimized on that blue line of either Stanley or DeMello.
Yeah, for sure, Huss. I mean, Paul Stastny is the ultimate insurance policy for all of the things that you mentioned. He's a great mentor for Pierre-Luc Dubois. He's a great safety valve if you need him to move back to center. And he'd be a great guy for Cole Perfetti to learn from as well, right? I mean, this is a guy, Cole Perfetti is a sponge. He loves the game. He soaks up everything about it. He loves talking about it. Paul Stastny is a great veteran. The beauty of Stastny, Huss, is that if you wanted to play Paul Stastny on the third line with Adam Lowry, he can do the job. He did it last year briefly. You could play those guys together. I mean, Stastny's comfortable on the right side, depending on what happens with Andrew Copp. I think there's a lot to be said and a lot to be made for Paul Stastny returning. But it all comes down to dollars and cents. And, who else is coming back? I mean, the one thing we saw, Huss, from the teams that made it to the Final Four, they all had a very capable fourth line. And as I mentioned earlier, David Gustafsson has to play this year. He's ready to play on your penalty kill if you're the Winnipeg Jets. He's ready for a bigger role. Christian Vesalainen showed at times he's ready for a bigger role. Those guys had chemistry together with the Moose. Do you play them together? You could. Vesalainen might be with Lowry. Let's see how these things play out. But I think that there could be in the market. One of the things we know, Huss, after Scheifele went out of the series with the suspension, Jets didn't score. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them maybe in the mix for some of these guys. I mean, one thing that I thought with Ottawa, talking about Evgeny Dadonov, I mean, here's a guy that is going to be available. He is a consistent 20-ish kind of goal scorer. He has a big frame. He doesn't really play a physical game, but he's a guy that can play either wing. And for a team that doesn't have a lot of right wing depth, to me, he's a guy that could make some sense depending on the price tag. But that's one of the guys that I would be on the lookout for on the trade market. We know Ottawa's got a lot of young forwards they want to insert into the lineup. Maybe that could be a way that the Jets go if they're looking to add offense in a bit of a bigger frame.
All right, one more Jet question before we get back to the Kraken and everything else in the league. If the Jets are going to address the defense, and assumably the right side of the defense for this year, do you think they're looking for a player with term, or is it a player on a 1 year or a 2 year deal? And are there any names that come to mind that you think Chevy might be kicking tires on?
Sure. I mean, we know the name in the news right now is Rasmus Ristolainen. We know the Jets have been linked to him in the past. They've been interested in his services. We know that the underlying numbers don't paint a pretty picture for the Buffalo Sabres defenseman. But one thing I would say,
was there good for anybody on the Buffalo Sabres last year?
I would say this is how I would describe it and how I've said it to people before. I mean, Ristolainen is in a situation that was similar to where Tyler Myers was at when he joined the Winnipeg Jets. He had been through a long stretch of losing where things had been very challenging. I think he would really benefit from a fresh start, if you will. Obviously, we know that his analytics and his analytic numbers are not good, but he's the kind of guy that has some of the elements the Jets are lacking on the back end and things that they are looking for in terms of size and physical play. And he's pretty mobile for a big guy. He's got a big shot. Yes, I understand a lot of his points come on the power play, but you're not bringing in Ristolainen to be a Dougie Hamilton. You're bringing him in to play a shutdown role with a Josh Morrissey. So all about the price for me. I mean, the one thing with Ristolainen is he only has 1 year left of term. I think it's around $5.5 million. So, I mean, are you willing to go Dylan Samberg and a pick or a prospect? I mean, that's a steep price to pay.
No.
Exactly. So for me, the bigger one has, what are the Nashville Predators doing, right? Are they rebuilding or are they spinning their tires, or what's David Poile going to do next? They protected 5 defensemen. If the Nashville Predators are going to go on any sort of rebuild, and if Ekholm is available, the Jets absolutely have to put together the best package possible. Of course, it would have been better to get Ekholm for last year at the deadline to get 2 runs at it. But we know that fell through because the price tag was too high and Nashville felt that they were still in it. To me, if Nashville is rebuilding after moving out Ryan Ellis, that is the prime target for me. If I'm Kevin Cheveldayoff, I think it's very interesting to see what Nashville does. I don't know if he's available, but if he is, then I think you're looking at reassessing what the best offer that you can make is. But of course, they want to have a long-range solution. So a guy on a one-year term like a Ristolainen or Ekholm, it's a little bit. It would provide immediate relief, but I think the Jets are looking for more long-range relief. But at the same time, maybe they want to make an offer that they could extend one of those players if they were in the bidding. But I think it's a fascinating time coming up for the Jets. I think the roster is going to look a little bit different by the time we get to July 29th. How that looks and where those changes come, I mean, that's the beauty of what we do. We're going to follow it as close as we can. And right now, the crystal ball looks a little bit cloudy, but I think a lot of things are going to be coming into focus over this next 8-day period here.
All right, Kenny Wiebe with us talking Jets and everything happening around the National Hockey League. Oh, one more just on the Jets. Matthew Perreault. Do you think they'll be talking with Perreault about potentially coming back at a obviously less than he was making last year? Or is that one of those spots that will be opened up to a younger player or potentially a newcomer?
Yeah, I think the Jets value Matthew Perreault and what he has done. If I had to bet on the cool bet train, Huss, I would bet that Matthew Perreault is moving on to another opportunity. But on a one-year deal for $1 million or $1.5 million, I mean, I would certainly consider bringing him back if I was Kevin Cheveldayoff. But they also have some young forwards that they want to be getting into full-time duty. So I'm not expecting Matthew Perreault to come back, but I think the door is definitely open that for both sides to consider a reunion. But at this stage, I would say it's unlikely that he will return unless, depending on how the market shakes out. But I'm not expecting Matthew Perreault to be back. He was one of the smart free agent additions for the Winnipeg Jets when he was not qualified by the Anaheim Ducks. I think that was one of the shrewdest moves that the Jets made. That first deal, I think, what is it, 3 years at $3 million a shot. I mean, obviously Perreault did enough to earn a big, significant raise to 4.125 or whatever it was. And here's a guy who plays his behind off. Huss, we know that he's a guy who can give you minutes up and down your lineup. He helps the power play. He's a real good team player and gives you everything that he has. So that type of player would be welcome back on any hockey team. But right now, I would guess that he's looking for another opportunity. And to me, I think that he'd be a guy that would be great. I mentioned Tampa earlier. I mean, Tampa's going to be needing those Pat Maroon type contract guys. I think that Matthew Perreault would be an incredibly great addition. And when you're going for a three-peat, Huss, you're always looking for guys that are hungry. I think Matthew Perreault would be an excellent addition around that $1 million mark for a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning.
All right, Ken, now one other question of a player that we have not brought up. You can see this right here. Our guy, Sami Niku. I'm an owner of this Upper Deck clear-cut rookie card. What are the chances Niku is a Winnipeg Jet next week?
That's I'm not going to go 0, but I'm going to go a number probably closer 10%.
Like is he a player that they might move at the because the one thing about Niku is that I think there'd be some interest, and you already mentioned the Jets only have 4 picks in this draft.
Yeah.
Now, I had speculated that depending on the way their draft board looks, and I think that we're going to talk to Michael Farkas a little later on from Hockey Prospect on this, and Scott Wheeler tomorrow. I expect these draft lists to be incredibly different from team to team, and they often are anyways. But then when you add in the scouting challenges this year, like if the Jets get to 18 and they have, 3 or 4 guys that they still feel are first round value, and they can pick up a second rounder by moving back, 8 or 9 spots or something like that. First of all, I think that might be in the mix. But I also wouldn't be surprised if they have decided that Sammy, is just too far down on the pecking order. They've got other young defensemen that they want to get in ahead of him. Might they trade him now and, in before the draft to potentially add a little bit more draft capital, if you will, to stockpile, having only 4 going into this weekend?
Yeah, for sure. I would expect Niku to be involved in some discussions. I just don't know what the value is. Obviously, the Jets would still like to get significant, decent value, but I think it's probably, right now, if we're guessing, it had to be somewhere in a later round pick for Niku's services, but he'd be a guy that would have a lot of appeal. What do we know? A lot of owners lost a lot of money last year, and a lot of teams are looking for salary cap space, including the Seattle Kraken. So if you have a player that is at I think 775 or whatever, I think that's what it is for this year, and then you would have team control after that. I think that Niku would be viewed as a potential bounce back candidate also, just because of the mobility and because he has that AHL strong season where he was the Eddie Shore winner as defenseman of the year. But I don't think a lot of teams would be giving a lot up for him. I do think that it's probably best for both sides to, start a fresh relationship elsewhere. It's probably time to cut the cord. Niku wasn't even practicing with the Jets last year at the end of the year. So I think he's ready for a fresh start, and I think that he will be moved. I don't know if it's before the draft. I would expect it to be before the draft, but I'm not 100% sure on what the asking price or the going rate is to acquire Sam Niku, but I don't expect him to be back with the Winnipeg Jets, no matter what's happening on the back end. I think that both sides are probably going to head towards a divorce, if you will. But I wouldn't be surprised if they're trying to add a later round pick for Sam Niku, or maybe he's part of a bigger package, on something like an Ekholm or a Ristolainen, where one of those teams would be looking for Niku as a value added kind of proposition, if you will, leading into the season or into the draft.